work toe-up socks, we generally consider the side edges, one of the sides, to be the beginning of the round. So depending on how you put your needles in, which side you put them in from, and so forth, we're just going to join the working yarn for the heel, and I'm going to do a contrasting color here. Sometimes you knit a sock heel in contrasting color as part of the design of your sock, and I'm doing it here just so you can clearly see what I'm doing. I'm going to just start knitting with this heel yarn, and I'll just start right at the beginning. And the heels work just in stockinette stitch, and we'll be doing some decreases to shape the heel. But the first thing I'm going to do is just knit around a few plain rounds. Some people like to go in there and pick up the bar that's between the last stitch on the sole and the first stitch on the top of the needle and vice versa, and knit into the back loop of it. And then when they come around again, they will knit two together and get rid of that extra stitch. And they find that that helps close up any little hole that might form on the side of the heel. I don't really find that to help me in that manner, so I don't usually bother doing that. If I do have a little hole at the side of my heel, when I weave in my ends, I just close it up by sewing it closed. But that's something you can do if it's an issue that you find troublesome and you find that doing that helps you. So I'm going to just bypass that step because I don't find that it helps me. Now remember I said at the end of the needle, when we picked up the live stitches, there's one that's maybe not quite like a live stitch, and you can see that one. It's kind of on the side and it looks a little strange. But that's fine. The way it's on my needle now, when I knit into it, it's going to twist, and that's fine because it'll close up any hole that might form from that being a misshapen stitch. So I'm just going to knit into it and then go all the way across the stitches on the top of the foot. And remember, we're not actually working on the foot here. We're actually creating the heel now. So we're just going in stockinette stitch. We're not paying any attention to the pattern. That's all finished already. So you don't have to worry about if something was a knit or a purl or anything on the foot. And remember also I said that some of the stitches might be turned backwards on the needles, and I showed you how to turn them around as you're slipping across, but in this case I didn't slip across, and some of my stitches are turned backwards on the needle so that the leg near the point of the needle is in the back. And so if I knit it into the front of that stitch, I would twist it. So when I notice a stitch is turned around that way on the needle, I just knit into the back of it. And then when I have one that's in the correct orientation on the needle, I just knit into it normally. And I just do that as I go along, paying careful attention on that first row to how the stitches are oriented on the needle. So then I get everything straightened out. Again, when I get to this last one though, that was a little bit of just a loop, not a stitch. I do want to twist that one because I don't want it to create a hole from a misshapen stitch. But those ones at the beginning and the end of that needle, if they're a little misshapen, those are the only ones that you want to twist. Everything else you just want to knit as a normal knit stitch. So now we're going to knit a couple more rounds just in plain stockinette stitch, and then we'll come back together and do the decreases, and I'll show you how you actually begin creating the shape of the heel. I'm ready to start the decreasing on my heel now, but before I show that to you, I just want to talk about why I knit a few plain rounds. You could just knit one round and then begin the decreases for your heel, or you could knit up until you have about a ½ inch, no more than that, or somewhere in between. And knitting the plain rounds, what that does is it lets you have a little bit of a bigger heel. Because there's not very much control over the size of this heel, you can control it, the width of it and the size of it, by making it on more than 50% of the stitches. I've done it on half of my stitches, but I've mentioned that you could go up to 60%, which enlarges the whole heel. But if you just want to enlarge it a little bit and make it a little more curved instead of a sharp wedge shape, you can knit a few rounds plain before you start the decreases. And that's what I've done here. But I would never go more than a ½ inch or a couple of centimeters before I started the decreases, because that just would create a shape that wouldn't curve around your heel properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing 4 decreases on every other round. And so what I will do is I'm going to knit 1 stitch and then slip, slip, knit at the beginning of the sole stitches. I'm going to go across to the last 3 stitches of the sole, and I'm going to knit 2 together and knit 1. And then I'll turn and go on the other side, and I'll do the same thing. I'll knit 1 stitch and slip, slip, knit, then go to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1. And then I'll do a plain round. So just knitting the first stitch, and then I'm going to do a slip, slip, knit, and go across. And again, nothing different if you're working on circulars. You're going to be decreasing in the exact same spots. The beginning and end of the sole and the beginning and end of the instep. Just go all the way across the sole. Last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1. On the next side, same thing. At the beginning, knit 1, slip, slip, knit. Go all the way across to the last 3 stitches. On the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1. And then I'm going to knit a plain round. And then what I'll do is go back and forth between plain round and decrease round, plain round and decrease round, until I have about 1 inch width left. So it's going to get narrower and narrower as I decrease. And when I have about 1 inch left, or about 1/3 of the stitches that I had in the sole or instep, so in this case, remember I had 48 stitches, so I had 24 in the sole, 24 in the instep. I would probably decrease until I have about 8 stitches left. So the 3 decisions you have for changing the sizing on an Afterthought heel are whether you knit it on 50% of the stitches or a little bit more than 50% of the stitches, whether you knit some plain rounds before you begin the decreasing or not, and if you switch to decreasing every round when you get near the end of your decrease section. Those are the 3 choices that you have. So if you pick it up on 50% or half the stitches, that's a pretty average size heel. You can enlarge it by going up to maybe 60%. If you just knit 1 plain round and then begin decreasing, that's the standard shape of this heel. If you want to make it a little bit bigger and curvier, you can knit plain rounds up to 1/2 inch. And then when you get to the end, if you want to curve the actual ending of the heel or make it a tiny bit shorter, you can change to decreasing every round instead of every other round. All right, so that's all there is. You just keep doing that with those decisions until you're down to your 1/3 or about 1 inch width of stitches.